The moves started coming in Monday afternoon, and they kept coming so much that I actually had to reshoot the beginning and the ending part of this episode. All the signings, all the moves made or being made by the Washington Commanders coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're getting this podcast. You can do so for free, no matter what platform you are on. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders today. And from there, you will get news, analysis, one-on-one conversations, bonus content, all kinds of extras directly to your phone via text message from me. No hashtags, no apps. And you can even be a part of the show by helping me out. I got insiders texting me while I'm recording this episode saying, David, Austin Ekeler to Washington is happening right now. Thanks for the heads up, everybody. Allowing me to reshoot my intro and reshoot the ending of the show so we can get some Austin Ekeler stuff in here. So that is coming at the end of today's episode. Of course, I'm David Harrison, your host of this episode, here with you Monday through Friday, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On today's episode, we are going to talk with David Drogemeyer of Locked On Chargers about Austin Ekeler. Who are the Washington Commanders getting in their new running back? And we're also going to talk about the other moves. Frankie Luvu, Carolina Panthers, linebacker. But we do have to start this episode off with two Dallas Cowboys coming over to Washington via free agency, those being reported on Monday afternoon. Again, nothing official until Wednesday afternoon, but reportedly agreeing to deals here on Monday. And if you go back to our last episode, we had our mock offseason. I went ahead and signed some free agents, drafted some guys. One of the guys that I signed in that mock offseason for the Washington Commanders was Dallas Cowboys edge defender Dorance Armstrong, and he was the first free agent of the free agent period, not counting Zach Ertz, who was signed before the free agent period opened, that the Washington Commanders signed, according to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler initially, and then, of course, confirmed by all the heavy hitters, Ian Rappaport's and all that stuff. But then Ian Rappaport also dropped news that Tyler Biadasz, Dallas Cowboys center, was also joining the Washington Commanders. So who are the Washington Commanders getting from Dallas in Armstrong and Biadasz? Well, in Dorance Armstrong, you're getting a defensive end, edge rusher, whatever you want to call him, however he's going to play. Turns 27 in June. He's played 93 career NFL games so far in 6 seasons. 7.5 sacks his first 4 years in the league, 16 in the last 2. So a significant uptick in production. He's at 23.5 sacks total. Now, just for reference, and again, this is just for reference, not trying to point anything out or do anything, but just for reference, he's had 21 sacks since Chase Young entered the National Football League. Chase Young has had 16.5 in the same time period. He's had 23 sacks since Montez Sweat entered the National Football League. Montez Sweat has had 41.5. So if you're looking for kind of where does this guy stack up, right now, a little bit more on the Chase Young side, more than Chase Young, but still more towards the Chase Young side of things than Montez Sweat. The difference is he's been doing it mostly as a backup, as he has not been a regular starter for the Dallas Cowboys in his career. PFF had him ranked as the number 13 free agent edge rusher in this year's market, and the deal is for 3 years up to $45 million. Reported $15 million annual average value, is top 13 amongst defensive ends in the NFL as it stands today. And again, this is a guy that obviously Dan Quinn, Joe Witt Jr., the defensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, now know very well. They worked with him in Dallas. They were able to get some of that really good production out of him during these last couple of seasons. So if, again, it's kind of one of those things where I know some Commanders fans don't necessarily like seeing Cowboys come over, and I know there's a little bit of grumble going on from some fans who don't really like that coaches like to bring their old players with them. But something that I'll say about this situation specifically, you're talking about a coach in Dan Quinn, who is a new head coach because he got promoted, right? The previous head coach here got this job after being fired from another head coaching job, was hired to be the head coach here. And so you're talking about bringing players over from a team that quite frankly, you got fired coaching, right? Like that's, so I understand the grief, I guess, there a little bit better, but at least these players are part of a winning system. They're part of a system that that helped produce the opportunity for this head coach to become a head coach once again and get that promotion. So to me, it's a little bit of a better angle, a better look when it's coming like that. And to me, Dorance Armstrong kind of stands out as one of these guys who's looking for an opportunity to start, looking for an opportunity to earn a starting job, looking for an opportunity to get on the field a little bit better, a little bit more. I brought that up to Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. You might be interested to hear what he thinks of my comparison. He doesn't necessarily agree with it, but we're going to talk that out with him here in just a little bit. Turning out to center, Tyler Biadasz. He turns 27 this year as well. He'll turn 27 in November. He's got 61 career games under his belt, 53 starts and 4 seasons for the Dallas Cowboys. He's only been credited with 3 fumbles. Now, that's important because centers, a fumble is a botched snap, right? So he's only been credited for 3 of those, which, could bode well for his snapping ability, which is certainly something you want out of a center. He's a 2022 Pro Bowl alternate, PFF's number 5 center free agent on the market this year. He had a 64.6 pass blocking grade in 2023. That's number 23 among all NFL centers. Nick Gates, by the way, had a 61.4. So Biadasz grading out a little bit better than Nick Gates did. Biadasz also had a 68.3 run blocking grade in 2023. That's number 19 overall. And Gates came with a 70.9. So Nick Gates was actually a better graded run blocker than Tyler Biadasz was last season. So we'll have to see how that pans out. Of course, his deal 3 years up to $30 million, $10 million annual average value is 7th among NFL centers. So certainly getting paid in the upper echelon of NFL centers right now by the Washington Commanders. Don't really do grades for these types of things. There will be grades coming out, and certainly I'll probably publish them. We may even talk about some of them, but I personally don't do grades because I kind of view grades as basically just my way of telling you if I agree with the deal or if I don't agree with the deal. That's really all a grade can be, because these guys haven't performed anything yet. And ultimately, whether or not a signing turns out to be smart or otherwise is going to be based on how well they do or don't perform, right? So I don't really do grades, but I will tell you that I do expect Dorance Armstrong to compete for a starting role in this Washington Commanders defense. I think when you look at the defensive ends currently on the roster, clearly he's going to be defensive end number 1. I think he comes in ahead of KJ Henry, ahead of Andre Jones Jr. But again, we've still got more free agency time to come. We've still got the NFL draft to come. So whether or not that actually stays in place is to be determined. But again, I just get the feeling that Armstrong is out there trying to find a spot to be to compete, to challenge, to be a starter in the NFL. So I think that he's going to get that opportunity here in Washington to at least compete. I'm not saying that he'll necessarily keep it, but at least compete and come into training camp expected to be one of those guys that's going to try to fight for a starting position. I also expect Tyler Biadasz to compete for a starting role as well. Perhaps this could push Ricky Stromberg over to left guard. Maybe you have Sam Cosmi at right guard, Stromberg at left guard if he's healthy enough to return, and Biadasz at center. Certainly, potential filled pairing there. Obviously, it's a trio that we haven't seen on the field before, so you can't necessarily say with definitive knowledge what it would look like or what it will look like, but you can certainly see some of the potential there. And of course, the NFL draft is still to come. Now, that's the important part here. I don't think either of these signings necessarily precludes an NFL draft pick by being spent on either of these positions, interior offensive line or the defensive end position. But I do think that the Biadasz signing takes a pure center off the board for at least the first 3 rounds. So I don't think you go after like a Zach Frazier. You've got Tyler Biadasz, you've got Ricky Stromberg. I don't think you necessarily go after say a Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, who's really looked at as kind of just a pure center, not really looking to shift him to guard or anything like that at this time. So right now, the Commanders still need another starting caliber edge, whether that comes in the draft, whether that comes in free agency. If it comes in the draft, I would say probably top 40 pick in the NFL draft, but they still have plenty of time in free agency to potentially go and sign someone. Because in my mock off season, they did sign Armstrong, but they also signed another defensive end edge player, whatever you want to call him. They signed Daniil Hunter out of the Minnesota Vikings organization. He is still available at the time of this recording, so potentially could still happen. That, of course, will help shape our draft picture moving forward. Before we get to future draft conversations, though, we're going to hear from Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys on what he says the Washington Commanders are getting in these 2 free agents, and we're going to talk about another free agent signing coming from the Carolina Panthers. But don't worry, it's not bad. We'll talk about all of that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing that you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Maybe you'd go for a run. Maybe you'd take a nap. Maybe you'd read a book. Maybe you show up for a friend in need. I could use an extra hour today to watch a little bit more film on some of these new additions to the Washington Commanders roster. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. But the question is, what would that time be used for? If your time was unlimited, how would you use it? Well, the best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you most so you can do more of it. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a brief questionnaire. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist. And the best part is you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge and no investigation into your reasons why. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Continuing on now with today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today and every single day. Everydayers, come back tomorrow. We'll have more information, more news coming down. As we're recording this, Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers just got traded to the New York Giants, and he's getting a massive contract with the New York Giants. So Bryce Huff going to the Philadelphia Eagles, Brian Burns going to the New York Giants. The Washington Commanders needed tackle help before Monday. Now they really need tackle help. So we're going to have an episode where we talk about everything going on around the NFC East. Of course, obviously, we're going to stick to what's going on with the Commanders here today. But if you want to hear everything going around the league, Locked On has also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Plenty of NFL shows running on that channel, obviously all this week. So you'll hear plenty of information, plenty of reactions, and to all the news going on around the league. For example, the Dallas Cowboys losing some players. Let's hear from Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys on what he thinks the Washington Commanders are getting in their 2 free agent signings on Monday. And we are joined now by Marcus Mosher, one of the hosts of the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Marcus, you already said bye to Dan Quinn. You already said goodbye to Joe Witt Jr. You said goodbye to some other folks, but now you got to say goodbye to Dorance Armstrong and Tyler Biadasz, both of those guys coming to Washington. Now let's start with Dorance. He was the first one that was kind of reported. The original report was just that they were closing on a deal, but then Ian Rappaport, shortly before we actually hit record here, confirming that the Commanders are signing the former Cowboys edge defender, Dorance Armstrong. It's a 3-year deal worth up to $45 million. So we don't know all the details. That's a pretty good deal for that young man, though. Tell us what we're getting in Dorance.
A really well-rounded player that can do just about everything on the defensive line. He doesn't do anything at an elite level. He's not a number one pass rusher, but he's a really important guy to have on the defensive line because he'll stop the run. He'll rush the passer pretty well. You give him one-on-ones. He does exceptionally well there. He'll kick inside the defensive tackle if you need him to do that. And plus, he's been PFF's number one graded special teams player in each of the last 2 years. He blocks punts. Just a really good utility player that you want on your defensive line. Plus, he's young. This is his 3rd NFL contract, and he's 26 years old. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, no, he's had a good run, right? I mean, you look at him and what is it? It's been 16, something like that, 16 sacks over the last 2 seasons, but he's only started 6 games in that same stretch. And surely some of that has to do with some of that sack production, possibly has to do with teams don't have to scout him. They don't necessarily game plan for him. So maybe he catches some folks by surprise. But anytime you get 16 sacks over a 2-season stretch, I think there's some talent there for sure. Marcus, he kind of reminds me, and I know you keep your eye glued to the entire NFL landscape, not just the Dallas Cowboys. So I want to get your take on this. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Shaquille Barrett in the sense that, I know Shaq is a stand-up guy. I think Dorance is more of a hand in the ground type of guy, but Shaq was coming out of a situation in Denver where he couldn't crack the depth chart, had really good production when he was on the field, but couldn't stay on the field. So he left looking for an opportunity to be a guy that starts the game and is on the field to end the game. And I think that's probably what Dorance is looking for. Do you feel like that scenario is similar? And do you think that Dorance has maybe that Shaq Barrett type of upside where he was able to get a Pro Bowl season out of his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
That's tough. I don't see Armstrong as a Pro Bowl edge rusher. I do think he needs to play along some really good players in order to maximize his value. But that doesn't mean that Washington made a mistake signing him. I think this is the type of player that you need to have to your defensive line that can fill all these different roles, that can be a reliable edge number 2. I still think Washington's got to go out and find their version of Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt. Like, I know those guys are really hard to find, but they need that guy that can open everything else up. But I think Armstrong, at the price that Washington got him, maybe a little bit expensive, but it's the type of player that you really need to make your defense competitive. And that's just not what Washington was last year. I think this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think bottom line, an upgrade over KJ Henry, Andre Jones Jr. coming out of their rookie season, certainly solid prospects, but not those kinds of guys. And keeps the door open for a guy like Danielle Hunter, Minnesota Vikings free agent. By the time this airs, he may already have a team, so who knows how that conversation is going to go. But certainly, like you said, I think Chop Robinson is still on the board. Danielle Hunter is still got to be, on the board for Washington. So a good signing, but not the end-all, be-all of the pass rush, certainly for the Washington Commanders. Now, on the other side of things, Tyler Biadasz, I think he's going to be a really good addition to the Washington Commanders. But again, like we're talking about the defensive line, right? Not the end-all, be-all, but what are they getting in the middle of this offensive line now from this former Cowboys center?
Toughness. That's the number one quality that Tyler Biadasz is going to bring to you. He's going to be somebody that's super tough, going to play through injuries. He played through a wicked high ankle sprain in the playoffs last year. He doesn't really miss games. And when he does, it's because it's a pretty serious injury. Better pass blocker than run blocker. He's not going to move guys out of the way of the run game, but he is somebody that gives you a little bit of nastiness on your offensive line. And for Washington, a team that's really been hurt by their center play, I would say Tyler Biadasz is slightly above average. But when you factor in how durable he's been, it really matters. Your offensive line is about continuity, and I think Tyler Biadasz can really help you there.
Yeah, 100%. 16 regular season games or more in the last 3 seasons. So certainly something you like to see out of an upcoming center. You mentioned toughness. That's something that Dan Quinn has preached. Marcus, I got to ask you, man, like there are some, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are some Commanders fans who are kind of rolling their eyes and they're like, here we go again. Another coach is going to bring all the players from his old team that the old team doesn't want anymore. Should Commanders fans be happy, sad, excited, disappointed that these former Cowboys are coming with these former Cowboys coaches?
Yeah, I think both Biadasz and Armstrong are good players. Now, I don't want anybody to get carried away. I know Biadasz made the Pro Bowl as an alternate a couple of years ago. They're not those type of players. They're not cornerstone type of players. But what they are is players that can help you beef up like players 11 through 13 on your roster. And that's what Washington has needed to do. They just needed to get more talent on the trenches, and these guys certainly help that. Both are super high character players, and that's something that Dan Quinn really likes. The guys are going to come into work, no nonsense. Again, not franchise-altering signings, but quality players.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Marcus Mosher, Locked On Cowboys. For more things on Dallas Cowboys. Look, you want to be a smart Commanders fan, you got to know everything about your enemies. So check out Landon and Marcus over on Locked On Cowboys 5 days a week. Marcus, thanks for coming through, man.
Of course.
All right, once again, that was Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. He and Landon do a really good job with Locked On Cowboys over there. So if you want to know about the Cowboys, head on over and check them out. Washington also signing free agent linebacker Frankie Luvu from the Carolina Panthers. And I know some folks were like, oh, man, another Carolina Panther. Look, Frankie Luvu did not play for Ron Rivera. He did not work there while, Martin Mayhew, Marty Herney, anybody with the organization today was there. So this is purely a unique individual. Frankie Luvu, linebacker, turns 28 in September. 2024 will be his 7th NFL season. He spent his first 3 years with the New York Jets, last 3 years with the Carolina Panthers, and it looks like he's going to spend his next 3 years or so with the Washington Commanders. Again, not a Rivera, Mayhew, or Herney Carolina Panther. Had 5.5 sacks in 2023 alone, 7 in 2022, 100-plus tackles in each of the past 2 seasons. And when we start looking at what Frankie Luvu might do for the Washington Commanders as far as rush linebacker, coverage linebacker, you look at his most recent season, had 104 pass rush snaps in 2023 and earned a 90.1% or 90.1 PFF grade in those snaps and had a 19% win percentage. He was the top graded off-ball linebacker with at least 100 or more pass rush snaps in pass rushing. So pretty good pass rusher when he was asked to do so for the Carolina Panthers. He also had 422 pass coverage snaps. He came away with a 67.7 PFF grade there, 17th among linebackers with 400 or more coverage snaps. And he allowed a 107.6 NFL passer rating, which isn't great, but certainly better than what we saw with the Washington Commanders. A run defense grade of 74, which is 39th overall, 18th among linebackers with 300 or more run defense snaps, of which there were only 46. All of that, honestly, so all those grades, all the stats, all the stuff, Again, it doesn't tell you exactly what's going to happen with the Washington Commanders, but it gives you an idea of where he's coming from and why the team is doing this. All of that stuff better than what Cody Barton and Jamin Davis did in 2023. So I guess from that aspect, at least you can look at it that way. And again, if the Carolina Panthers, as much as they struggled, the defense wasn't really their biggest problem. It was all on the offense. And now they're losing Frankie Luvu. They're losing Brian Burns. I mean, I think they're probably cruising for another number one overall pick. So for everybody who says you take a quarterback in the number one overall pick because you're not going to be there very often, the Carolina Panthers might make a run of 3 straight number one overall picks earned. Of course, they're not going to pick this year because they've traded that to the Chicago Bears. Of course, last year they didn't earn it, I guess, so that doesn't count. But regardless, the Carolina Panthers going from top 10 pick to number one overall pick, earning the number one overall pick, maybe on their way to earning another number one overall pick. So rough times out there in Charlotte for sure. Not a rough time for Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson not coming back to Washington. He was able to find a new home, where he's going, how much he's going for, and then we'll do a reset of the free agent market to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA basketball tournament. Whether you're betting on big upsets or the number one seeds, it's time to go dancing on America's number one sportsbook, because right now, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 that you use on point spreads, money lines, anything. You can even pick who's going to win the entire tournament. Selection Sunday is coming up this weekend. The UConn men are currently plus 500 favorites to win the tournament on that side. The South Carolina women are minus 115 favorites to win on their side. Of course, the start of the new league year is coming up on Wednesday. All the excitement has already begun. The San Francisco 49ers are currently favorites to win Super Bowl 59. The Kansas City Chiefs are second favorites coming out of the AFC with plus 650 odds. The Commanders, meanwhile, have plus 15,000 odds currently as it stands today. To get in on all the fun, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. One of the best times about this time of year is that you're doing your show and you just never really know when to hit record because news is coming all the time. As I'm wrapping up my Tuesday episode of Locked On Commanders, I go over to Twitter and I see that Austin Ekeler, former Los Angeles Chargers running back, is signing with the Washington Commanders. 2-year deal worth up to $11.43 million, according to sources. David Drogemeyer of Locked On Chargers. David, thank you for joining with me. Very, very short notice. Thank you for saving my episode because obviously I got to do something here about Austin Ekeler, right? So right off the bat, man, just tell us, what are the Washington Commanders getting in Austin Ekeler?
Yeah, they're getting a touchdown machine. I mean, not so much last year, but the 2 previous years before that, he scored over 30 touchdowns and, led the league by a country mile. Austin Ekeler, I think, did slow down a little bit last year. I think it was a little bit noticeable. He's got a lot of miles on him, right? The last several years, he's been the feature back of the Chargers, and he's got the lion's share of the touches. But one thing that is for certain, Austin Ekeler is still an extremely dangerous pass catcher, a guy that you get in open space. He is very difficult to bring down. He's very low to the ground. He's a guy that is still very much a weapon in this league.
And I think all of that honestly is music to the ears of Washington Commanders fans, because you got Brian Robinson, who's still expected, I think, to be the starter. I think you would probably agree with me there. B-Rob should still be the feature back, the number one back on the field. And then Austin Ekeler basically comes in to be your, call it change of pace, call it receiving back, third down back, whatever you want to call it. And then Chris Rodriguez Jr., their rookie last year from Kentucky, kind of a little bit of a bowling ball up the middle. And then I think he's got a little bit of receiving ability in him too. Actually, Austin Ekeler might be able to teach him a few things about being a receiving back. Because there was a day, David, and you know this more than I do, Austin Ekeler was slept on. Austin Ekeler was not really known. He was kind of not really expected to do much. Talk about just kind of the rise of Austin Ekeler through the Chargers organization, because I've been a fan from a distance for a long time of Austin's, but you've been right there in the heart of the Chargers, beat and everything going on there with that organization. So talk about just where Austin came from, who he is, and then almost as important, I would say, on the field stuff, who he was in the locker room.
Yeah, Austin Ekeler did everything the hard way. I mean, his journey was very, very difficult. It came from a very small school, Western Colorado State, and had to earn his way onto the Chargers roster. By no means, when he came in, did he have anything handed to him. He had to go out there and grab it. He had to go earn it. And he basically just went up to the coaches and said, hey, what do I have to do to make this roster? And basically they said, hey, I need you to go in there. I need you to make an impact on special teams. And that's exactly what he did. And he didn't really get to run the ball very, very much in the beginning, but just through hard work and dedication, this guy pound for pound was one of the strongest guys on the football team. And he's not a big guy. Okay. But this guy is a gym rat. He is a guy that is always working on himself, working on his body. He has a lot of interests outside of football. He is very business minded. He has a lot of different ventures that he's into, but he definitely locks into football. When it's time for football, he's all football all the time. He was very much a locker room leader. He was a guy that people followed. He's very social. Don't be surprised if you can get him on the show. We had the pleasure of having him on the show a couple of different times. He is all over the place on the media side, but I still think, like I said, that he is a guy that can be a weapon, especially in a more specialized role. But I think the man that you're getting, the person that you're getting is top notch, high class. Never had any issues with Austin Ekeler outside of some things that were said when there was some contract negotiations going on. You know how that goes. It's the NFL. Yeah. Things are going to be said. Business is going to be made. And, this was kind of something that we always kind of thought was going to happen heading into this free agency, is that Austin Ekeler was going to find himself with a new team. And here he is winding up with the Commanders.
Yeah, no, he's not the only former Charger joining Washington this season. Anthony Lynn, also a part of the staff here now. What are your recollections of Anthony Lynn as a coach, and what do you think about this reunion of player and coach once again here in DC?
Yeah, for Anthony Lynn, just straight up leader of men. I mean, there was a guy that was very easy to follow. He has a presence when he walks into a room. He's a guy that's kind of magnetic in that situation. I think as a head coach, he definitely had some clock management issues that were very, very highlighted in his tenure as a head coach. But make no mistake, he's a great running backs coach. He is extremely knowledgeable in the game. He's been an offensive coordinator before, an assistant head coach. So I think Anthony Lynn's definitely a guy that can lead men in the NFL. So I think obviously there's some familiarity with Austin Ekeler and Coach Lynn. So I mean, that's what it's all about, right? You see that more often than not. The connections that people make, they tend to manifest themselves throughout the decisions that front offices make throughout the league.
Yeah, I mean, so we talk about quarterback carousels all the time. This offseason right now, anyways, running back carousels, right? Josh Jacobs goes to the Packers.
Crazy.
Aaron Jones gets released. Gus Edwards goes to the Chargers. Now Austin Ekeler is going to DC. And we're just getting started. This is just the first 12 hours of free agency going on here in the National Football League. David Drogemeyer, your buddy. Daniel, you guys do a great job at Locked On Chargers. So everybody make sure you're giving that a look. And David, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, man.
We will dive deeper into Austin Ekeler and his soon-to-be arrival to the Washington Commanders coming up on tomorrow's episode. And who else knows what else is going to happen between now and then. In the meantime, you got questions or comments, drop them in the comment section. Text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider. You want up-to-date conversation with me on all the news as it's breaking? That's the best way to do it. Locked On Commander. Join subtext.com/Locked On Commanders to do that right now. Of course, don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind. I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.